Right, now I'd like to invite David Jones to the stage. Yeah, we're going to be talking a little bit about A2A contracting. So David is the chair of the GSA's contracting working group, as well as being the founder of a very cool tech platform that GSA uses called Clausify. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. Navigated the stairs without falling, so part one, that's good. Okay, let's have a look. So I'm going to talk about AI to AI contracting, as Kerry said. First off, I'm going to talk about the cost of hallucinations. Now, that doesn't mean big Saturday night out, feeling bad Sunday morning. That means in the world of AI, having effectively a completely unexpected and random output when you were expecting something completely different. Does anyone heard of Stephen Schwartz? Anyone here? Maybe one or two lawyers might. I don't know about anyone else. Yep, I can see one person. So Stephen Schwartz, sadly for Stephen, is going to be known a bit better than he'd like to be after this session. He was a New York lawyer, and he used ChatGPT to research a brief in a personal injury case against an airline. The brief cited 6 cases, and it looked fantastic. He used lots of legal language, a bit of Latin. It looked absolutely pucker. So he thought, this is great, this is fantastic. I will send it off to the judge. The problem was that none of those 6 cases existed, not one of them. ChatGPT had fabricated the whole lot and made it sound quite plausible and quite realistic. The opposing counsel challenged and said, can you please elaborate on these cases that we've tried to find and cannot? And Schwartz actually used this is brilliant, I think. He actually used ChatGPT to say, ChatGPT, were you lying? And ChatGPT said, no, honestly, I wasn't. So he then responded to the lawyers to say, no, honestly, they do exist, which is absolutely crazy. So he did that. The judge then was not impressed. The judge basically sanctioned him, sanctioned his firm, fined them $5,000, and indeed said that he'd actually acted in bad faith, not just in the initial submission, but in doubling down on it thereafter by asking ChatGPT, is this all correct? Yes, and going back to opposing counsel, instead of saying, mea culpa, I stuffed up, he doubled down on it, and that was a real problem. So the bit that was really embarrassing for this lawyer, though, is that the judge asked him to share with the real judges whose names have been attributed wrongly to these random quotes. The judge asked him to share the sanction with those judges. So you can imagine how incredibly professionally embarrassing it was for a lawyer to say, hey, judge, I just falsely attributed a whole load of judgments to you that you didn't actually make. And I might be appearing before you in court in a few weeks' time. So his career is effectively not in a great place. Now, that was in the US, and that was in the year 2023. And of course, since then, large language models, AI, it's come on a lot, right? We don't get those mistakes anymore. Everything's fantastic. No. Last year in the UK, there was a £90 million lawsuit involving the Qatar National Bank. And a lawyer cited 18 cases that didn't exist, and also cited... And also amongst those 18, there were some real cases which made citations and quotes to judges, that were never actually made. In a joined case with the London Borough of Haringey, a barrister cited 5 fake authorities. Now, here's the bit that's really, really scary if you're using AI. This really, actually, I found quite shocking. Presiding Dame Victoria Sharp noted, I'm going to quote here directly, that widely available generative tools such as ChatGPT are not capable of conducting reliable legal research, and warned of serious implications for the administration of justice and public confidence in the justice system if artificial intelligence is misused. The lawyers that misused in that instance were referred to their professional regulator, the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, and Sharp noted, and this is very, very concerning, that actually there could be contempt of court proceedings brought against you if you are found to, in that first instance, we take that example, when you're questioned on something and you double down and say, no, this is actually correct, that could potentially constitute grounds for contempt of court, which would see you do jail time. So this is quite serious. We want to get this right, obviously. So who is at fault? We touched about that previously in the previous speech, which was fantastic. Couple of things to bear in mind. The example I just gave was in a situation where it really shouldn't have occurred. There were multiple checkpoints for that error not to have found its way to the judge. This was a black box being used to produce a document which presumably should have been validated and verified by a human, and when challenged, again should have been validated by a human. There were multiple checkpoints for this to be fixed, but it wasn't. So how, if we're not comfortable even to get AI to check a bunch of cases that have occurred, historic fact, and reporting them faithfully, why would we trust AI to contract and create legally binding obligations on two businesses without any of those safeguards? I'll just pause there. That's actually quite sobering when you think about it. When we used it in a very isolated use case with multiple checkpoints, it failed. And yet people say, I'm going to get Claude to draft my contract and I'm not going to review it. Certainly for me, I think that's something, there's a big gap there and a big disconnect that needs to be bridged. The other thing to think about is scalability, right? So humans make mistakes. Lawyers make mistakes. Lawyers reviewing contracts miss things sometimes. And it's not what we want to happen, but ultimately there is professional indemnity insurance there to cover those isolated occurrences when they happen. The problem with computers is the great thing about computers at the same time. Great thing about computers is they do things very quickly and they do things at scale. But when they fail quickly and they fail at scale. So that one liability clause miss doesn't become an isolated problem in one contract. It becomes a systemic problem in your entire contracting suite. It means that you would have potentially a risk that would otherwise be a bad contract, meaning a bad business unit or a bad business. And ultimately, have we got risk appraisal systems and ways of mitigating risk that is systemic like that? I don't think, for example, that insurance is necessarily caught up with having a system where that risk isn't just an isolated occurrence and it's contained and it relates to a certain thing. It could actually be across the board. And I'm not sure what the case is now. There will be people here who know far more about insurance than I do. But certainly, from my understanding of it, it's built on the idea of there being a professional exercising reasonable judgment and skill. And so an underwriter will take risk based on the fact that there is a particular risk associated with a particular percentage of contracts going wrong. And on that basis, a premium is paid and the risk reward is accepted by the insurance company. That flips on its head slightly if you look at AI and the potential for every contract an organization signs is actually faulty. Will the insurer stand behind the professional indemnity insurance in that case? Or will they say, no, actually, this is too big a risk. You're asking me to insure your business. This is something that we can't do. So effectively, what I'm not saying is that we shouldn't be using AI. We shouldn't be using technology. I'm massively keen on AI. I use it for a lot of my job day to day. But I think we absolutely need to be very, very clear on exactly what we trust it with and exactly what oversight we place on it and the outputs of it. Now, we are going to come to now thing that I'm quite passionate about, anyone who's seen me talk in any of these sessions before, and that is around standardization. Now, it is like the really unattractive, boring kind of like brother to AI. AI is like the kind of sexy, everyone wants AI, great. And the standardization is like the nerdy kind of friend that like everyone doesn't really pay attention to. But it actually has some huge advantages over AI. So firstly, the risk I just mentioned about hallucinations, obviously that's contained significantly if you're working from a standard document, because the only area within which that hallucination could manifest is one of the bespoke custom fields, right? Everything else is locked and provides safeguards. The other thing to think about is that this is likely to be much better received by your insurers. If you were to say, I'm using the GSA standard terms, for example, it would be known that's a pretty fair, sensible, balanced set of T's and C's. And I think most insurers would go, that's a pretty responsible way to go about doing business. But I think the key thing is to make sure that where we use AI, it is perhaps in using standards to get to the end result quicker. So if you have effectively AI with guardrails, which is the framework of a standard contract, the editable fields could then be written by AI, and you then have de-risked a lot of the scary things. So for example, don't have AI touch liability. That's a standard clause. You put in a number. That's fine. You can control the risk a lot better if you do one of two things. Have a human in the loop, number one, and two, have some parameters around it by way of standard terms. So in short, in summary, and I've hopefully made up a bit of time here, Kerry, let's use AI for what it's great at, but let's also keep a human firmly in the loop, leveraging some of the less sexy technologies like standard terms to get 70% of the job done so that we de-risk the main part. And that's it. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, David, and thanks for helping us catch up on some time. So.